The air smells like papyrus and cedar oil. A man is walking barefoot across a marble floor holding a clay lamp in one hand and a scroll case in the other. Outside, something is burning. It is the winter of 48 BC, and the greatest library the world has ever built is about to disappear from it. What did the Library of Alexandria actually contain? Not in the vague romantic sense, not all the knowledge of the ancient world, but specifically, what scrolls? What voices? What questions humanity asked itself once, wrote down, and then lost forever? The answer is not what you expect, and it changes something quiet but permanent in the way you understand what civilization actually is. Alexandria in 48 BC is a city of perhaps 500,000 people, the second largest in the Mediterranean after Rome, and by most measures more educated than it. The royal quarter occupies the northeastern edge of the city, pressed against the harbor, white limestone catching the light off the water in a way that ancient visitors described as blinding. The library itself, the Bruchaion, the royal collection, is not a single building. It is a complex. Lecture halls, covered walkways, a dining hall where scholars ate together at the king's expense, gardens where geometry was argued under fig trees, and rooms, long, cool, cedar-paneled rooms, containing an estimated 400,000 scroll rolls, though the historian Aulus Gellius, writing in the 2nd century AD, placed the figure closer to 700,000. We do not know which number is right. What we know is this: no human institution before or since assembled so much written thought in one place. His name, according to a marginal note in a later Coptic manuscript, may have been Apollonides. We do not know if this is true, but we know a man like him existed, a copyist and annotator assigned to the section the Greeks called the Mathematica, the scrolls on measurement and number, and the motion of spheres. He would have worked by lamplight in the last weeks of that winter, in a room that smelled of cedar resin and old linen, where the scroll racks rose 2.5 meters to the ceiling, and the only sound was the scratch of reed on papyrus. What he was copying, what he may have been copying, was Aristarchus of Samos. A complete Aristarchus, not the fragments we have now, the full text. Aristarchus, working on the island of Samos in approximately 260 BC, proposed that the Earth moves around the Sun. He did the geometry. He calculated the relative distances of the Sun and Moon. He was right. The world would not reach the same conclusion again for another 1,700 years, when Copernicus, who cited him, reconstructed the argument from the rubble of what survived. The scroll Apollonides was copying that night contained the proof. What people call the burning of the library is not one event. That is the first and most important fact most histories omit. The complex was damaged, looted, underfunded, and slowly dismantled across at least 4 centuries. From Julius Caesar's accidental fire in the harbor district in 48 BC to Aurelian's sack of the Bruchon in 273 AD to Theophilus's destruction of the Serapeum in 391 AD to the Arab conquest of 642 AD, after which the scholar Ibn al-Kifti recorded, though this account is disputed, that the scrolls were used to heat the city's bathhouses for 6 months. But something decisive happened in 48 BC. Caesar, fighting Ptolemy III's forces in the harbor, ordered his ships set alight. The fire spread to the docks. Some part of the library's collection, stored near the port, possibly awaiting export, possibly in a warehouse annex, burned. The ancient sources disagree on how much. Seneca says 40,000 scrolls. Orosius says 400,000. The truth is, somewhere in the chaos between those numbers. And the chaos is the point. What burned that night was not backed up. There was no copy elsewhere. The Hellenistic world's model of knowledge preservation was centralization. Gather everything here, in one place, under one roof, under one king's protection. It was an extraordinary idea. It was also a catastrophic architectural decision. Think about what centralization meant in practice. A botanist named Theophrastus, Aristotle's student, who died in 287 BC, had written a 9-volume work called Historia Plantarum, a systematic account of every plant species known to the Greek world, with their uses, their growing conditions, their medicinal properties. The library held the complete text. We have 7 of the 9 volumes today. The other 2 are gone. We do not know what plants he described. We do not know what cures were documented. We do not know what agricultural knowledge, what drought-resistant crops, what growing techniques was recorded in those pages and in no other place on earth. Eratosthenes, the library's third head, working around 240 BC, measured the circumference of the earth to within 1% accuracy. That calculation we have because it was cited repeatedly and survived through citation. But his Geographica, a 3-volume work in which he mapped the known world and proposed that India could be reached by sailing west from Spain, is lost except for fragments quoted by Strabo. Columbus, sailing in 1492, carried a corrupted version of an argument that Eratosthenes had already made, correctly, 17 centuries earlier. The word historians use for this pattern is lacuna, a gap, a hole in the record. But the scrolls in the library were not gaps. They were answers. We turned them into gaps. This is what scholars call the library's paradox, and it is the hidden wound at the center of this story. The very act of preservation, centralizing knowledge, concentrating it, protecting it in one magnificent institution, made that knowledge maximally fragile. The library was the safest place for a scroll to be. It was also the most dangerous. Every egg in one basket, every word in one city, every thought in one building that could, on one winter night in 48 BC, catch the light of a harbor fire and be reduced in the time it takes a man to run from one end of a colonnade to the other, to a column of smoke rising over Alexandria's pale limestone walls. The historian Plutarch, writing a century and a half after the fire, noted that Caesar expressed regret. The word he used in Greek is metamelia, something between sorrow and embarrassment. Not quite guilt, not quite grief. The emotion of a man who understands that something important has happened but cannot quite grasp its scale. Neither could anyone standing in the smoke that morning. Here is what we actually lost. Not metaphorically, specifically. We have the titles from later catalogs of works that existed in the library and do not exist now. Among them, the complete plays of Aeschylus, of whom we have 7 surviving out of approximately 70, the complete works of Sappho, perhaps 9 books of lyric poetry, of which we have 1 complete poem and fragments of the rest, many recovered from papyrus scraps found in Egyptian garbage heaps in the 1900s. A text by a philosopher named Democritus, who proposed in the 5th century BC that matter was made of invisible, indivisible particles he called atomoi, atoms, and who wrote at least 70 works, of which we have 0. Not fragments, 0. We do not know if Democritus, working in 460 BC, had already solved problems we think we solved in the 1900s. We cannot know. The library had his books. The library is gone. We still do this. We still build libraries of Alexandria, not in marble, but in server farms, in cloud platforms with terms of service that can be canceled, in social networks that delete accounts in digital formats that become unreadable in 20 years, in companies that go bankrupt and take their archives with them. The library's paradox, that centralized preservation is both the safest and the most fragile model, is not an ancient mistake. It is the architecture of the present. Every time a streaming platform removes a film from its library, a version of Apollonides is walking barefoot across a marble floor, holding what he cannot save. The last thing Apollonides would have done before the smoke reached the inner rooms is roll the scroll back to its beginning and tie the linen cord. That is what a copyist did when a scroll was finished. He protected it. He prepared it for the next reader. We do not know if anyone ever read it again. The Library of Alexandria did not die the night Caesar's fire spread across the harbor. It died across 4 centuries, in pieces, in decisions made by people who each told themselves that someone else would preserve it, that there was time, that the knowledge was safe enough, that the building would still be standing in the morning. Civilizations do not collapse in a single night. They collapse in the accumulated assumption that someone else is carrying what you have quietly let go. The greatest library ever built was destroyed not by one fire, but by the shared belief held by thousands of people across 4 centuries that someone else was responsible for keeping the light on.